Good day and welcome to the new Coach Me to Lead episode. This day I'm talking to Peter, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Peter Benei.
Sort of like, yeah.
So
It's called
how do you say
it,
it?
it's called Benei,
Benei.
but that's fine, totally fine. It makes sense
No,
to pronounce it that way. Welcome, everyone.
and you are somebody who's working on a leadership thing. Your company is actually called Leadership Anywhere, so that's good.
Well,
Oh,
the
Anywhere.
company is
Sorry,
called
Anywhere Consulting.
yeah,
Sorry.
the company is
Your,
called Anywhere Consulting, and
yeah,
and
your
just
book
doing
is called
business on
Leadership
the.
Anywhere. Uh, don't
No
make it too
worries.
confusing. So what you do has to do with two things, and we're going to talk mostly about one of the parts of that. But it
Sure.
has to do with working remote, working from anywhere, and it has to do with leadership.
Mhm.
So you have been well. Let's first talk about where you are. So you've been studying in Budapest in Hungary.
Originally
And
from there, yes.
yes, you've been born there, you've lived there, and then you started working, and at some point you started to move to London.
Sure.
So what?
Well, that you just summarized 10 years.
I know. So fill it a bit in and tell me, why did you move from your first job as a PR consultant
Yeah,
to your first job in your first company, Comma Media, and
yeah,
then to head of social in London?
yeah. So that part of my career, I tend to think back as I would have two different career stages. So the first stage was in office, and the second stage was remote. The in office part was like a kind of like a straight line. So I started as a PR consultant like many years ago in Budapest. Originally, I studied media sociology and history and stuff like that, but that doesn't really matter. Um, and then I quickly co-established, so I had co-owners, this small agency in Hungary. It was a social media agency, so that was kind of like a new thing. In 2007, 8-ish or something, everyone was just figuring out how to communicate social. Like, come on, like, I mean, if you remember, Facebook pages as like a business page just came out at that time, so that was pretty new. It was a consultancy and a social media marketing agency. We quickly signed up big clients and stuff like that, and I mean locally, of course. And but we started not really innovating anything. Also, I was super young, so I was like 27, 8 when I started the company. I consider it as a young founder, which means that you make all the mistakes that you can, which is fine. You know, it's a learning curve. And I sold my stakes in 2012 and moved to London. Now, I wanted to move to London to get some like a global view on what I do, and I also wanted to think that I mean, I'm capable, I'm enough to be able to work in the advertising industry in pretty much one of the big hubs of the world, where most of the big time agencies are having a HQ or something. And I started doing that for like 2 and 3 years, and but something happened during that time, and that's what served as a kind of like a trigger point in my second half of my career. I started seeing people working remotely more and more. At first, it was just like, people didn't come to the office at all. I usually worked in the city, I mean, in the central. Downtown, and just the freelancers or the service providers that we worked with, they just sorry, I'm in Thailand or whatever, or traveling, or just not coming to the office at all, but here is my work. And I thought that I can do that. I can do that while not living in London, although I loved the UK. I loved London, and still London has a really special place in my heart. the rent is so high, and the commute is so big, and I own my apartment here in Budapest. So I mean, it was a no-brainer to make the switch, and I had to make two switches actually during that time. One was obviously ditching the office at all with all the securities that it provided. So no more benefits and full-time employment and whatever. I always worked as a contractor from there. That's one. I didn't consider it that much of a switch, by the way, but that was a switch as well. Also, I worked with Fortune 500 brands most of the time when I was working in agencies. So I was very well versed with enterprise grade and enterprise level, like communication, workflows, like everything that comes with it, and also leadership style. So don't forget that at that time, I was managing people around me, like small teams of 10, 20 social media teams, marketers, copywriters, and whatnot. And I had to ditch that because obviously it's a remote work, right? So at that time in 2014, 15, most of the startup companies were open to employ anyone remotely. So they were growing companies, 10, 50, 100 people max, usually with a head office in the US, which was an office, and like, I don't know, 60, 70, 80% of the people scatter across the globe as, marketers, developers, service providers, and so on and so on and so on. So it was a switch in terms of focus and also working style. Went forward almost like 10 years during that time. I learned that some of the skills that I learned in enterprise level communication and leadership were still valuable, and actually it served me as a competitive advantage compared to those who never spent any hour, day in an enterprise office or working with enterprise clients directly on site. But some of the skills that I learned from those years, I had to just simply unlearn it and amend it to the remote environment. And
before we go into that, hold on.
Yeah, so that's it.
You're diving really deep already into this.
Yeah, sorry.
So why did you change from a steady job into freelance work, into projects?
It was a simple mathematical equation for me. It had a higher risk, of course, but let's quickly clarify. If you have a full-time job with a full-time employment and everything else, you can still be out of the job really quickly if you do something bad. So I always considered every full-time, proper employment that I had as an illusion of stability or safety. So that's one thing. But maybe that's just personal to me. I don't know. But so yeah, you lose that either illusion or real safety that you have. But the money was better. Come on, let's face it. And also you can use the geo arbitrage. So at that time, I was earning really well in London. I could earn, I don't know, 80, 90% or sometimes 70%, depends, of the same London-based salary, but not spending that salary in London. I don't know, 10 years ago, Budapest was really cheap and affordable as a place. Now it's not really that, but I had so many margin, shall we say, left over in my pocket. So it was a no-brainer decision for me. That was a financial reason, but there was also the freedom reason, which was super valuable for me. I grew up in an entrepreneurial spirited family, so we were always independent, even during the communist era or something. So I never considered myself as a good employee, shall we say. Um, and I always thought myself that, I need to have a certain level of freedom to operate. It's not a coin. I mean, we were really young and made all the mistakes when we started our first company in like 2007. But there was a reason why we started that company. So obviously, no one actually liked going back to the office, working for a company that we don't own. We are not responsible for it, and it didn't provide us the freedom. We had to commute, and these kind of stuff. That kind of freedom was really valuable for me. So, and that was a big yes for remote work.
So then you started working remote. You moved back to Budapest. You started working for companies in the US, so it was not even more European based. It was from anywhere. But you mostly worked for companies in the US from, I saw New York City, Miami, Newark. So you do a lot of things from that way, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to jump a bit forward and I'm going to go back later on. But first,
please,
what did change? What changed for you when the world closed down around the pandemic?
Well, aside from the curfew, I mean, in Budapest, at that time, at the start of the pandemic, I was in Budapest. And we had I wouldn't say very strict, but like a strict curfew. So you couldn't leave the house and stuff like that for a couple of months. I can't remember properly now. Aside from that, nothing has changed. So I don't really prefer co-working offices at all to work from. It's just a personal thing. I always had my home office at home set up. Most of my clients, not most, every client I had, they were remote. The only change maybe, I think was, but again, I'm not sure if I worked for that company at that time, but sometimes we travel to Eindhoven to visit one of the companies that I worked for. And yeah, you just stopped doing that because you couldn't do that. But aside from that, it's not really, I didn't have anything changed. And immediately after the curfew ended around June, July or something, I don't know, again, I immediately moved to Italy from there, because if you are in a lockdown, you better be next to the sea and eating Italian food with Italian people. Sorry about that. But
yeah, I was just talking to somebody early this week from Africa, and she says, "Well, yeah, it's so good for you. Everything is so close by." And I go like, "Oh yeah, close by, yeah." Well, from an African perspective, yes, that is true. For us, it still feels like, okay, if I go to Italy, it's still, what is it, 15 hours if I go to Rome, for example. If I go to Barcelona.
If you drive or something.
Yeah, if I drive. If I fly, it doesn't. But I prefer going by train or something instead of by flying.
Me too.
If I go to Barcelona, it's also almost 24 hours by train. So
yeah, but you are in up north, so that's why. To me, if you consider it from Budapest, northern Italy, because I lived so I lived in Rome, I lived in Verona and Firenze as well, and that's not that a big bit of a big deal. I have a dog, so I can fly with the dog, but so I drive also. So it's like maxed 12 hours for Rome, but the others are 1 day each.
Yeah, correct. Oh, you didn't, for sure you have the beautiful cities there, Verona and Firenze, so it's beautiful there. Rome is too busy, especially with the tourists, but other than that, it's a beautiful, beautiful city.
You know where to, you have to know where to stay.
Yeah, of course.
To avoid the crowds. Verona is not that crowded in terms of tourists.
No.
And it's if you've ever been there, it a little bit reminds me to Budapest, because we also have these like uphill mountain side of the city and the flat other side of the city, crossed by one big river. And Verona is also like that in a smaller scale. So I felt immediately at home there.
I can understand. Yes, lovely. So let's go to your book.
Yeah.
Because I think that was the main part why I invited you to this
Sure.
conversation. And your book is called. Now I lost the name of your book. At first I mixed it up. Leadership Anywhere, but the subtitle is How to Become a Better Asynchronous Leader.
Sure.
For people, I will show the link here at the bottom at anywhere.consulting/book.
It's free, by the way.
Yes, I know, and that's why I'm showing it too. You have to leave an email address, you have to leave some information, but you can download it for free. You get it for free. It's a PDF. You can also use the EPUB, so you can really read it in your Kindle even. And it has a couple of interesting chapters in this. But first, that gets to the difference that you talk about in the book about hybrid remote async.
Mm-hmm.
What is the difference? Explain, please.
One thing for sure, I wrote it almost like a year ago, and within the future of work space, everything is changing so fast. So, but I define usually kind of like the same way all of these aspects. Hybrid is when you do have an office or a head office or something, a location, shall we say a location, and you have certain people who are commuting to that location and other people who don't. They either work remotely, they either work offshore, whatever. But they are not tied to that location. Well, in a technical sense. But they do tie to that location in a how they work sense. But more on that later. Remote is when everyone is free from the location. But they are not free from the time. So they usually work mostly synchronously, meaning they have these conversations like these when we talk synchronously with each other. They have so many meetings. That most of the work happens in a shared time, shall we say. In hybrid, most of the work is happening in a shared space, even in a location. Now, asynchronous is the third category, is when you totally ignore both and most of the work, or at least some aspects of the work, happens location and also time independent. So let's say like a collaboration on a document. That's like an asynchronous workflow, right? Because I can collaborate on the document within my time, whenever I feel to or obligated to. And I can contribute to the document on the Canary Islands, Budapest, or Verona, or whatever. It doesn't really matter. And you will see the contribution, and you will respond and work with the contribution and provide your contribution, also not limited by location or time. So pretty much that's the essence, but obviously the whole picture is so much complicated than that.
I'm thinking, because if it's remote, that usually then means that people kind of live in the same time zones.
Sorry?
They live in the same time zones?
They can.
If you have the same hours, same office hours that you work with, then it sounds like you kind of like live in similar time zones. So then
not necessarily. Okay. So, for example, you can, of course, but it can be distributed totally as well. So, for example, how I worked for, well, not most, but some of the companies before in like last 10 years or so. I'm an idol, by the way. I battle with that thing for, I don't know, decades. It's so hard to change that habit. So I wouldn't mind if I need to work at 9 p.m. or something. And for some of the clients that I worked with, I had to actually work at 9 p.m. because of meetings and stuff. Because again, I'm in Europe, Central European time zone, and they are in the East Coast more so. in the US, which is like, help me here, I
6
think 6
hours. Yeah.
hours. 6 hours. And they wake up at 3, my 3 or so, start working there. So yeah, so you actually obliged, and that's, by the way, hybrid. So you are still working within the time zone of the core team, and that's it. Yeah, it can be time zone agnostic, of course, depends. But when I say remote, I think it's more like most of the work is done in a non-asynchronous manner.
And you talk about if you have an asynchronous process, and I'm very interested in always in decision-making processes. So you say if you have an asynchronous process in your office, or in your company, as I say, you have more time to make better decisions.
Of course.
Please explain.
Of course, most of the decisions that we make at any given time, at any given place, and any given situation, we make bad decisions because of 2 things. We don't have time to actually look deep into the problem, so we don't do the research because we are time pressured to make a decision, right? It's an urgent thing, I need to decide right now, Either because we are time pressured by external situations, by the way, which is fine, by the way, you have to deal with the fire, that's okay. But to be honest, most of the fast decisions are made because of the individual who is making the decision is pressuring themselves to make the decision fast. So it's either time pressure or time limitation, sorry, or information limitation, which kind of like coming from the time limitation, but you make the bad decision because you have limited amount of information on the possible outcomes or the situations or the scenario that you have on sort of. Now, if you do that asynchronously, or more with an asynchronous fashion, shall we say, you have like certain steps that you are familiar with the decision, but it's a collaborative and a more time-independent decision. Meaning, what's the decision? It's usually a face off with the problem, right? You write up what the problem is, right? That's super important. You write it down in a document or whatever. That immediately forces you to think about the problem, by the way, because most of the decisions are intentional and impulsive and really quick. So you write it down, you think about the problem. It takes 10 minutes, by the way, if you are, really starting to picking the time and stuff. It's like 10 minutes. You do it within 10 minutes. You write a suggestion on how you would solve the problem. Sorry. You share. The second step is you share it with your coworkers, managers, whatever, within your decision-making circle, who are either able to grasp or understand that same problem that you are doing or you're facing with, or they are incentivized to look into the problem. You pick the people, whatever, you share the document with them, allow them to contribute to the document on their own, in their own time. You gather the third step is you gather the reviews, the feedback, everything that you have in the document, and on you review all of those, solve it, reply it, you're like cleaning up the document. And the fourth step is and that's synchronous. This is the first 3 steps were all asynchronous, by the way. So it happened without considering, obviously you give it like a deadline or whatever, like 1 day or something, because it's like, you need to solve the problem. And the fourth step is that you bring people in a synchronous meeting and do a Q&A, allow them to express how they feel the problem should be solved. It's individual per case, but you will have a synchronous decision-making meeting. We can call it a meeting. And the fifth step is that, yes, you solve the decision together, and you as a leader, I wouldn't say issue a statement or something, but communicate that this is how we solve this problem and document the whole decision-making process. The things that you will win with a process like this, I hope it was simplified or something and understandable. Obviously you reclaim time to make better decisions. So more information, asking others to contribute. 3, all the process had is documented, meaning that later on, half a year later, a year later, whatever, when you when you're faced with the same problem, you won't need to make the decision at all. You just look at the process. We made that decision before. That was our response. It worked, and that's it. Also, you can learn a lot from the documentation itself, like organically anyway. Plus, and that's the most important part, most teams are struggling with, and especially remote teams, by the way, with the lack of transparency and clarity, right? When you have a documented collaborative decision-making process, when you actually solve the problem and make the decision at the end on the fourth step or the final step, you don't need to sell that decision internally, right? Everyone is on board. Everyone was part of the process. They are already clear why you made that decision and what was the problem, how did you solve, etc., etc. So it's an immediate boost to clarity and transparency for the team, and that's invaluable.
And I've been studying a lot about decision making, and I think by one of the most important thing that you can do in decision making, if you want to make your process of decision making better, and everybody should, is when you document it, when you write it down, the process, you can evaluate the process, because it's very difficult to evaluate the process from the top of your head by going at the results. If you, I'd say, for example, like you said, 6 months later, you will review the process and decide if you have made a good decision or process. It's not the decision itself, because that's very difficult to determine if you made a good decision, because all external effects could influence the results of the decision. But you can look at the process, and if you have documented the process, that's a good way to review the process. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult. Yes. So I love what you've described in the book about the decision maker process, and also the asynchronicity of that, and also the transparency with the team. I like that a lot, because I think if you want to build young new teams from young new companies, like you work with a lot of startups, when you have like more like a horizontal kind of way of organizing things, it's really important that you be transparent as much as you can be, and share as much information as you can, and document everything that you do, so that people can just step in pretty quickly and and become a leader of themselves with the processes and everything that's been laid out, and decisions that have been covered of how you made a decision in the past. All the other people can review the process and see, oh, this is what they did, and this is why they decided that. So I can also use this probably in this decision. So yes. It's so valuable on all these steps.
And just imagine, sorry to step in, but just imagine how people are making decisions nowadays. I mean, the majority, the leadership. They usually make the decisions on their own, sometimes based on numbers, in a good case, but on their own, meaning that they either issue the statement of the decision or they need to sell internally somehow. That's like an extra job. I mean, that's like extra legwork for them. Yeah. So, and also it's an alone thingy that they need to do. They are totally alone with that. That's why they employ coaches, by the way, to help that decision-making process, right? Yeah. Or the second one is that they gather a meeting unfacilitated with some of the managers, and they decide what needs to be done in a good case. All I'm saying is that by moving some of the parts of the decision-making process asynchronously, it's not an extra work. The only thing that you will have is a focused, documented meeting at the end. And that's it. Just, have some context before the decision. Take the time to actually write up the context. And oh, by the way, most of the decisions get solved without the meeting. That's also super important to issue.
So you've been working at corporate companies and with corporate companies for a long time now. You've been doing that in the office, and you've been doing it externally, remote, I could say. What is for you the big difference? And you in our pre-conference, you mentioned that it's easy to learn these asynchronous way of leadership if you're just a leader in a regular job or in a remote job. What's the difference there, and why it's important to learn it that way?
So we have I think for every leader, for most leaders, they either have a leadership or they learned leadership practices in school, in MBAs or whatever. In most of the cases, I think we see that they are managing as a flyby in the office, right? So they grab people in, quickly interrupting the work. They talk a lot, meaning that they are less into support, less into listening, more reactive what they do in terms of the leadership style. That's I think that's a generic term. I think most of the leaders are pretty reactive to problems, quickly solving them. Some of these practices can still work remotely, but you have to adapt and adjust these practices to actually be able to lead remote teams who, again, they don't have an office, so you cannot just grab them and react to things, because again, no office, meaning that you don't know, you probably don't know what they are working on right now. If you not intentionally establish some sort of an operational level of, I wouldn't say tracking, but some clarity that tracks how people are working. So I think one of the things that you need to adjust is to talk less and listen more. People, I mean, I know it's super simple and cheesy, but it's a simple trick that makes magic. Ask people how they feel, ask people what they are working on, where do they need support. So it's more instead of a top down, it's more responding to what's beneath and how can you support that to grow. That's one of the most important ones. Second one is be a little bit more by default transparent. So because you have the office, of course, right? So you see everyone, you know everyone. If someone has a bad day, bad feeling, whatever, you can see it on the face and stuff like that. In remote, you can't do that. So the more transparent you are on how you work, and by transparent, I mean you document everything and track everything and whatever. I can go into the tactics, but the more transparent how you work, the more clarity you have within the team, especially when they are working remotely, because they cannot read stuff. They cannot read minds. They don't know where people are. And, it's kind of like a messy situation. It helps a lot. And the last thing I think that can be useful is being super supportive with people. Not many people do that they care about how people are working together, having more like an intention in terms of designing how operations is working together within the team. That proactivity and be a little bit more intentional in how you care about the people, how you work together, how you support them, how you lead them. It's more about intention and less about reaction.
Okay, so I'm going to slowly move to ending this conversation.
Sure.
Like I said, people can download the book. The link again is at the bottom. Anywhere.consulting/book or /book. You can download it freely there. Just give people an idea why they want to download this book from you.
because all I talk here right now are just principles and theories. And the book has actual like practical tactics on how. So for example, okay, that's one reason, transparency. What is transparency? It's in the book, really specifically described. Within my clients, when I tell them that you should have more transparency at your workplace, everyone freaks out, honestly, because it's like it's like fluffy. I don't know what it is. How can I action on that? You can. So transparency is just, and it's in the book, for example. Transparency is just a simple matter of access. You provide more access for your employees or team or whatever on how you work. That's it. And you can provide access to information, meaning that you have a company hub where all the information around the company is shared freely with everyone who's joined. They don't need to look for stuff; it's already there. You've provided information to operations, so most of the manuals processes are also on the hub. It's already transparent. You don't need to figure things out. You might need to improve things, but everything is clear on how to get to ramp up on your work quickly. And there are many like 3 other levels. I wouldn't go into details because of time constraint, but there are some really actionable tactical steps that people can do to work a little bit more better asynchronously or remotely.
Mm-hmm. Just to give people an idea, what is it what you do for your clients, and who are your clients?
Yeah, so I do. So all of the work that I do is connected to growth. Although I speak about remote work and hybrid and leadership, all of these practices that I speak about or teach about means nothing if you don't convert it into growth. So I usually serve as a growth consultant, but instead of like marketing campaigns and stuff like that, I take a operational level execution. So I refine their operations, mostly small, medium-sized businesses, startups, if it's fancier, in the scale-up stage, B2B SaaS or B2B tech companies. Because at the scale-up, before funding or after hitting a certain revenue, that's when usually these companies are remote first, by the way, so they are already remote companies, but usually they have a chaotic operations. At that time, they have to treat the problem seriously. Otherwise, if they don't do that, they cannot grow on scale. So funnily, I usually refer to myself as I'm the house cleaner of chaos at these companies. So usually I have a set terms of, 2 to 3 months, go in, clean up the house. Sometimes I stay for longer to actually implement stuff for them. But yeah, it's pretty much like house cleaning on my end.
Okay.
I don't want to degrade the whole
No,
work,
but
but
it's an important job, right?
Yeah, totally.
If we don't have house cleans, the thing would just turn into mess, and we can't find things, and things stop working.
Yes, productivity level will decrease. You will run through the runway, and you will burn all the cash that you just raised or got in revenue. Yes.
Thank you, Peter Benei.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And for this video of this episode and also the audio version will be published by Monday on the blog.coach.me. Thank you for joining us today. We will see you again next Friday, same time, same place, which means 9 a.m. at Central Time, US, and 4 p.m. at Central European Time. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Peter, again.
Thank you for inviting me.